In just a minute, I'm going to ask you to turn to the book of Isaiah, and we're going to look at chapter 11. We're skipping over chapters 9 and 10 because we're saving those for Christmas. But in chapter 11, we're going to come face to face with a prophecy. Lots of Isaiah is prophetic, meaning it's about the future. And before we have a chance to look at the actual prophecy in Isaiah 11, this feels like a good chance to kind of step back and explain sort of a framework for how prophecy works in the Bible. In many ways, it's a pretty powerful thing to see God predict the future, and then also to see how he brings that about. But especially when we're in the Old Testament, there is a need to kind of sit back or step back and kind of understand how prophecy in the Bible works. So what I'd like to do is remind you of an illustration that I used just a few weeks ago. And it was of sort of time like a scroll. And what I said is that time is it going to make it? Yes. That time is like a scroll rolled out before God. So we're in the midst of time and we're going through time, but God stands outside of time. And this is important and this is powerful because when we think about sort of events or things in our life, I have these cones that represent just sort of different points in history, that although we're going through time and experiencing them as they happen, God stands outside of time and he sees then and now at the same time. This is important because when you open up the Bible, and especially when you open up the book of Isaiah, this is the Word of God. And what we understand is that what is written with all of time in mind. Meaning that God can be looking at a situation 700 years before Jesus, which is when Isaiah is written, and seeing you and I today at the same time. Which is why when you open up God's word, it can speak directly to you. And sometimes you read it and you think, the words jump right off the page. And you're like, did someone write this just for me? And the answer is, not just for you, but yes, with you and your situation in mind. That's true, but there's another piece of it that I need you to understand, and that is that although God sees Isaiah's situation and our situation at the same time, he chooses to write the book of Isaiah from Isaiah's perspective. Meaning that's why we've been talking about in Isaiah 7 and 8, Ahaz and Israel and Judah and Assyria, and you've not opened up your Bibles and read words like China or America or the House of Representatives. So even though God is seeing what's going on in America today, he's chosen to write what he wants to say using Isaiah's perspective. Does that make sense? Now that's important because now we got to talk about how prophecy works in the scheme of things. And in order to do this, I need to show you that when Isaiah is writing his prophecies, even though God is giving them to him, he's writing them from his perspective. In order to do that, you're going to have to bear with me. I got to turn the scroll. So, we want it to look less like our perspective. Less like God's perspective and more like ours. So, all I've done is turn time. Okay, so instead of looking at it at the side from God's perspective, I know, I turn time. Come on, that's great, isn't it? What we're doing is we want you to look at the events of history from where Isaiah would be sitting. So especially this group right here. Like you're looking dead on to what would be going on. Now the important thing here is, from God's perspective, he sees all of this at once. But from Isaiah's perspective, he's in time, meaning that he's looking forward. Now some of you off to the sides, you have God's perspective. So let me show you a quick video of what it would look like from Isaiah's perspective. Let's run this video. We shot it of this. Okay, see how those two cones look like they're lined up? That's going to be important. Remember that. They're actually spaced apart. But the important thing is, from Isaiah's perspective, when he looks forward and sees the future, even though there are multiple events, they can appear to be one. It's like when you see mountain range and you see two peaks and you think they're right on top of each other, and then you get closer and you find out that there's a big gap between them. That's important because today we're going to look at a prophecy in the book of Isaiah. And most Old Testament prophecies work this way. They're written from the perspective of the prophet who is looking forward, and what the prophet sees might be multiple mountain peaks, but it's often written from the perspective as if it was just one thing. Which is why with so many Old Testament prophecies, we get what we call a near-term fulfillment and a far-term fulfillment. For example, in Isaiah 7, Isaiah is standing here looking forward, and in his prophetic pronouncement, he says the young woman is going to have a child. There is a near-term fulfillment, which means within just a year of saying that, there is a woman in Isaiah's time who has a baby. But at the same time, there is also a far-term fulfillment. 700 years later, the Virgin Mary gives birth to the child that is Jesus. He sees both of these and presents them as if they're one event, and only with the benefit of time do we realize there's actually a gap between them. Likewise with the prophecy that David would have a son who would sit on his throne. There is a near-term fulfillment of that. David has a son, Solomon, who becomes king after him. There's also a far-term fulfillment, which is, that is also a prophecy about Jesus, who is David's biological descendant, who also will sit on David's throne. Nowhere is it more important to understand this idea of near term and far term, or the idea that the Old Testament prophet is seeing something that looks like one mountain, when in reality it's two, than the prophecies that have to do with Jesus' coming. From the Old Testament point of view, much of the texts that talk about Jesus' coming present them as if it's one event. And that's because from this perspective, what they're seeing is the mountain range. And they're simply describing the mountain range. What we know from the benefit of time is there are some gaps between the first mountain and the second mountain. Does that make sense? Amen. With that in mind, I'm going to invite you to take a Bible and turn to the book of Isaiah, chapter 11. And we're going to look at a future prediction about Jesus. Isaiah chapter 11. If you don't have a Bible, there's one in the rack in front of you. It's page 562 if you're using one of these church Bibles. Isaiah chapter 11. And what we have in Isaiah is a beautiful picture of a God who pays close attention to the details of our lives, and who is also in control of all of history and is working all things together to bring about blessing and love and power and grace for us. So Isaiah 11, a beautiful prophecy about the coming of Jesus. I'm going to begin reading in verse 1. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den. The young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the seas. In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamath, and from the islands of the Mediterranean. What we have here in Isaiah 11 is a prophecy about a person, and that person is Jesus. And what we're going to see in this prophecy as we work through, verses 1 to 2 tell us who this coming person is. Verses 3 to 5 tell us what this person, Jesus, is going to do. And then verses 6 through 11 explain the results and the blessing that will come as a result of Jesus. So let's dive into who this predicted person is. Remember, Isaiah is writing this 700 years before Jesus is born. And he's looking forward through the Spirit into the future. And he describes the coming of one, verse 1, as a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. Now, this is a strange image. But what's going on here is it's an idea about the house of David. So Jesse is King David's father. David is the most important king in Israel's history. And those who rule Judah after David are all his biological descendants. So Ahaz, who's king at this time, is David's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. So 10 greats. He is a physical descendant of David. The problem is this tree that's come up from David is rotten. And that most of David's descendants, most of the kings of Judah are corrupt and wicked and evil. And so Isaiah says there's coming a time when God is going to chop down that tree. God is going to take Judah and the house of David, and he's going to destroy them. But the prophecy is, in that day, out of that stump that everybody thinks is dead, a tiny shoot's going to come up. New life out of death. Amen. A branch. And that branch is going to do what the dead tree never did, which is going to bear fruit. And that what the world thinks is dead, God has made promises to the house of David that he will fulfill in one of David's descendants. Which descendant? Well, if you'll notice, from his roots, a branch will come. It's a person. That's why we've capitalized the B. Now, the interesting thing about this word, this is the Hebrew word netzer, N-E-Z-E-R, roughly approximated. Some of you may be able to hear the verbal correspondence between netzer and Nazareth. Do you hear that connection? In Matthew chapter 2, verse 23, we're told that Joseph, Jesus' adoptive father, moves to Nazareth and raises Jesus there. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. This is a fulfillment of Isaiah 11, verse 1. And here's the crazy thing. When we talk about the fact that God pays attention to the details of our lives, the town of Nazareth does not exist in Isaiah's day. It doesn't exist. What God does is, In the course of history between 700 BC and 0 BC, God causes a town to come into being, and it gets named Nazareth in light of the fact that God has made a promise that there will be a shoot or a branch that will come from David's dead tree. He then causes Jesus to be raised in Nazareth so that he would be known as Jesus of Nazareth. Meaning every time you say that name, Jesus of Nazareth, it's a reminder of two things. First of all, that this is new life out of a dead stump. That this person has come in fulfillment of this prophecy. That Jesus has come on the scene to fulfill the promises that God has made here in Isaiah 11. That this is the fulfillment of what we've been waiting for. And the second thing it reminds us of is that this God who rules over all things, who stands outside of time, notices and controls the very details of our life. How else can you explain the creation of a town named Nazareth and a man growing up in Nazareth in fulfillment of this prophecy, except that God is in control of all things? Amen. And that when God caused Patty's friend Linda to text her on Tuesday, that fits with exactly who he is. The second thing we learn about this person who's coming, verse 2, the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. In other words, Jesus who is coming will be completely full of God's very Spirit. Meaning, the problem with Ahaz and the other descendants of David, and even David himself, is that they were making decisions in their flesh. They were deciding things with their own human weakness. The great news Isaiah says in Isaiah 11 is there is one coming who is a biological descendant of David, but who will be so full of the deity of God that he will be very God of very God, that he will come full of the Spirit of God. That all the wisdom, all the power, all the grace, all the love that is this God who stands outside of time, who conforms all things to the power of his will, all of that will be resident in Jesus. Amen. That the one who is coming will not just be a human king, he will be human, but he will also be divine. That's who's coming, Isaiah says in verses 1 and 2. What's he going to do? Verses 3 to 5. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. What is this predicted Jesus going to do? Exactly what you heard him do in Patty's life and her testimony. The way the kings of this world judge, the way all people of this world judge, is based on outward appearance. We pay attention to intelligence, to beauty, to age, to strength, to athletic ability, to money, to power. Those are the things that the people of this world go chasing after. And the truth of the matter is, hardly anybody in this world pays any attention to a woman who's spending her time caring for elderly, aging parents. The world has no interest in someone like that. The world has no time for someone like that. But you know who does? God. And the great thing about the one who is coming, the one who will have all power and all wisdom and all might, is he will not decide what he's going to do on the basis of outward appearance. Instead, he's going to decide what to do on the basis of what's right. How many of you have ever felt in a situation that you didn't have enough power or enough money, or that you didn't match up to what some people in this world think of as beautiful, or you weren't smart enough for some task, or you felt like your skin was the wrong color, or you spoke English with an accent that made you feel inferior, or you had reached a particular age where you thought no one would want you around anymore, or you're a particular age where you're not yet at a place where people would want you around, or you've got so much junk in your life that you think, why would anyone want to have anything to do with me? Or you find yourself so enmeshed or entrapped in addictions or in difficulties, you think, I'm a train wreck, why would anyone want to be around me? The great news is, God does. Amen. He is not making decisions about who to bless on the basis of those kinds of things. He is coming to bless all people. And while the people of this world run away from those who are too old or too young or too weak or from a wrong country, or the wrong skin color, the wrong background, God runs towards us. The good news is one is coming who is going to love us because it's the right thing to do. Amen. And that there will be nothing that we will do. No sin, no rebellion, no failure, no weakness, nothing that will keep him from loving us. Isaiah says, one's coming who's not going to be like the peoples of this world, who has all power and authority, and he's going to do the right thing. He's going to love people because they need to be loved. What then will be the result of his coming? Verses 6 through 11 give us four things. The first is that there will be peace. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. How many of us this week, as we watched or heard about election results or whatever it may be, thought, when's there going to be peace? When are people going to stop fighting with one another? When are we going to stop tearing each other apart? How many of us hear what's going on in the world or see what's happening in the schools or in the relationships, and we think, when is there going to be peace? Look at this picture. Predators and prey hanging out together. That instead of animosity, there is friendship. Instead of a dog-eat-dog world, there's people loving one another and being with one another with no fear. When this Jesus comes, there'll be peace. There'll be harmony. The world will function the way it was meant to function. Instead of people tearing each other apart, they'll be experiencing the joy of friendship and fellowship. Number two, what will be the result of this coming one? Verse 9, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord. One of the things I regret deeply is that we only had time this morning for one testimony. If I could share with you, just simply over the past 2 weeks, the number of people who sent me an email or stopped me and said, I asked God for a sign and this is what he did. It's astounding. And one of the things my heart's desire is, I pray, oh Lord, if they could just see this, if they could just know this. There is a whole world out there who thinks God is angry, who thinks God is vindictive, who thinks God could care less, who thinks God is too busy, who thinks God doesn't use Facebook or texting or phone calls to express his love to people. There is a whole world out there that has a completely wrong impression of God. There's a song that we sing here called Good, Good Father. And the opening line of the song goes like this. I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like. But I've heard tender whispers of love in the dead of night. And they tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You go listen to people in this world, they don't know anything about God. They think God is all about anger. He's all about judgment. He's all about intolerance. He's all about hatred. He can't be bothered with the cares and concerns that we have. He's not interested in us. Nothing could be further from the truth. And the reality is, Isaiah says, when this Jesus comes, he will be so full of grace and truth that people will finally know that there is a God who created them, who loves them. And the whole earth will be full of the knowledge of God. If every single person could just know how God feels about them, how God feels about us, it would change everything. Isaiah says it's coming. The third thing, verse 10, his resting place will be glorious. That has nothing to do with this person's grave or where they're laid to rest. It means he will provide a place of glorious rest, meaning the one who comes will give us rest. I don't know how you feel this week. I don't know if you're in need of rest, but this is the promise of Jesus. In Matthew 11:29, Jesus says this, take my yoke on you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find what? Rest for your souls. The weariness of life, the striving, the constant churning, the working, the laboring. It's like you're pushing a giant boulder up a hill only to have it roll down on top of you. The one who's coming is going to give rest. Rest, peace, and rest. And then finally in verse 11, in that day the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant. Isaiah says there's coming a day when God himself will go into the nations and start to rescue people one by one. That he will go and find people who are in slavery to alcohol, to sex, to anger, to greed, to gossip. Those who are enslaved to the systems of this world, to racism and sexism, to those who are enslaved to sin and death, and he will bring freedom. He will bring rescue. The good news is one is coming who will reclaim us from this world, from Satan, from sin, and from death. And even the idea of a dead tree now bearing life, that's who this person is. Jesus in his very essence is new life out of a dead tree. And the good news is he's coming to give that to you and to me. Even the idea of resurrection, life out of death. It's a beautiful, beautiful prophecy. There is one coming, a shoot from a dead stump, who will be born and raised in exactly the towns God wanted him to be raised in, who will be so full of God's Spirit that he will not judge based on outward appearance or what he hears, but will act always in righteousness and will bring about peace. Teach us who this God is that created us and loves us. Give us rest for our souls and give us rescue, redemption, and resurrection from all the things that seek to enslave us. It's a beautiful picture. But here's where the importance of understanding the framework comes to play. When Isaiah writes it, it's all future. And when he's looking forward, he simply describes the two mountains that he sees almost as one mountain. What we know with the benefit of time and the blessing of the New Testament is that there are two different mountains involved here. There is one that is his first coming, and there is a second, which is his second coming. And the good news for you and I, some of the things that Isaiah is predicting have already happened. He sees it as future. We get to stand in the middle and see it as past. Jesus has already been born of the Virgin Mary. Jesus already grew up in Nazareth. We already know him as Jesus of Nazareth. He was so full of the Spirit that he came and displayed God's love and his glory and his power, that he's already begun to give peace and knowledge of God and rest. And he's begun to reclaim and to resurrect those who were themselves part of that dead tree. This has begun to happen. We also know that some of this is still future. There is not yet peace on this earth. There is not yet rest for our soul. We have only a partial knowledge of who God is. We have been rescued, but not fully. And what Isaiah sees as completely future, we now stand in between. This is what the New Testament means when he says, you stand in the fulfillment of the ages. What has been predicted and prophesied in the Old Testament has begun to come true. Some of it's already happened. When Jesus returns, the rest of it will happen. With that framework in mind, let me give you two implications of this passage for us today. Number one, we stand in a better place than Isaiah did. Isaiah sat there, looked out here, and saw a great mountain or mountains in the future. And he described a beautiful future. But it was all future for him. For us, we now live in between the mountains. This future that we have is guaranteed because we've already seen that God has begun to do what he said. Listen, what are the odds that there's going to end up being a town named Nazareth that this person is going to grow up in when that town doesn't even exist when this is written? If God can bring that about, which he did, if God can cause Jesus to be born of the Virgin Mary, if God can cause Jesus who was crucified on the cross to be raised from the dead, if God can cause this Jesus who we have a record of coming, being full of the Spirit to do all these miracles, then you and I can be guaranteed the rest of the story is coming. It's already started. This is unfolding exactly the way God has planned. And the good news is, look at your future. Do you see what's coming? Complete peace on the earth. Full knowledge of God. Rest for your soul. An absolute and total resurrection, reclamation, redemption, and rescue. If the first part, if some of Isaiah 11 has already come to pass, you and I can be guaranteed the rest will happen as well. What Isaiah only saw as future, we now had the assured confidence it's coming because it's already started to happen. This is why the New Testament says to you and I, we live in the last days. The stuff that was looked forward to is already started. It's like the labor pains of a woman. That baby is coming. The process has started. And so the implication is, if some of this has already passed for us, then the future is guaranteed. Amen. The second implication. What Isaiah saw only as future, we can now experience as present. Meaning, peace, the knowledge of God, rest for our souls, salvation from the addictions and the sins and the difficulties and the hatred and the anger. All of that is now possible for us to experience in part now. We're still waiting for this final future fulfillment. But the great thing is, what was all future for Isaiah is now our present. That this person, Jesus, has made it possible for you and I to begin to experience these things now, here and now. The greatness of what's coming shouldn't obscure the fact that some of it is possible today. Today you can experience peace. Peace with God and peace with others. Today you can begin to know this Lord who does what he did for Patty. Isaiah didn't have that experience the way we get to have it today. His future is our present. And what's described here has already begun to happen. So that means this. If you're here this morning and you're not yet a believer in Jesus, I'm telling you, 700 years before he was born, God prophesied down to the very details of his life, where he would grow up and what he would be called, what he would do and how he would act. And this picture of the future that God has, is this not what you want? Do you not want peace on earth? Do you not want to know a God who loves you, who gave his son so that you might have life? Do you not want rest for your souls now and for eternity? And do you not want rescue and redemption? We stand in a more favored position than Isaiah's audience. They had to simply take it that it was coming in the future. Today, we can already say, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, just like it said he would be. Jesus was raised in Nazareth, just like it said he would be. Jesus died on a cross and was raised from the dead, just like it said it would be. And the encouragement is, come and join. Come and join. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. There is nothing that is going to stop God from bringing this about. There is nothing you could do. There is nothing that any world power can do. There is nothing that anyone can do. This is going to happen. Come and join. Come and be part of it. And for those of us who are Christians, the encouragement is twofold. Don't be afraid. The future is already written down. Peace is coming. Rest is coming. Knowledge of God is coming. Complete and total freedom from sin and Satan and death is coming. It is assured. And also, why not live in it today? What Isaiah only saw as future, we can experience as present. The best is yet to come. But thank God you can have peace today. You can know God today. You can experience rest for your soul in part today. You can experience rescue from God in part today.
Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast from Calvary Church. We hope this message has brought the light and hope of God's presence into your life, refreshing your soul for the journey the Lord has you on. If you have a spiritual need or would like to connect further with the work God is doing through Calvary Church, seek us out online at calvarygr.org. On our website, you can also find an archive of previous messages from this series. Thanks for listening.